Hello iPad letterers, it's so nice to see you. In today's video I am going to show you my all-time favorite thing, and that is making Procreate brushes. I've made thousands of custom Procreate brushes in the last 5 years and I'm really obsessed with it. One of the questions I get a lot is how do you make these brushes? And since it's not a super simple answer, I thought I'd put this video together for you and show you my exact process. But before we get started, I want to ask you if you have any of my brushes, which one is your favorite? Let me know in the comments, and I'm super curious to know which one you like the best. And if you were to ask me the same question, then my answer normally is my favorite brush is my newest brush, because every time I make a new brush, I find new and interesting ways of creating the brush, and that's why it usually is my favorite. So now let's grab your iPad and Apple Pencil and let's see if we can make your new favorite brush together. Of course, you will need the Procreate app, so let's start the Procreate app and let's create a canvas. And the canvas I'm using here is the screen size default canvas. It doesn't matter too much. You just want a surface so that you can try out your new brush. So we're going to open up the brush library and let's start by creating a new library. You can pull down on all your brush sets here to reveal the plus sign. You tap on plus and then we can call this my brushes. And now you can see it's empty. If you tap on any of the other brush sets, you can see it's got lots and lots of brushes. And these are all the brushes that I have already made. But I usually like starting with a fresh brush set so that I know where the brushes are. And then it makes it much easier to see your new brushes. Then tap on the plus sign to bring up the brush studio. And you can see there is so many options here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through my exact process of how I make brushes. It doesn't mean I'm going to go through all these different settings, and that's because I'm actually not using all the settings all the time. And also making brushes is very much a trial and error process, but I'm going to give you a starting point of your own trial and error process so that you find it much easier to create your own brushes. So you'll see that we have the different categories here, and then if you tap on one of the categories, you see the properties within each of the categories. And then here on the right hand side, we have got the drawing pad, and this is super useful because this is where you can try out the brush that you are currently working on. You can tap on the drawing pad to choose different colors. And so this is super handy to try out different colors and different shapes of the brushes that you're working on. You can also clear the drawing pad like this to start from scratch. So the first thing we are going to look at are the shape source and then also the grain source. And these two settings are really the basis of all Procreate brushes. Let's start with the shape source. And that shape source is what determines the outline of your brush. A stroke is created by a series of shapes, and the way it works is that you drag your Apple Pencil over the screen and then Procreate will connect all these individual shape sources to make this path. It's a little bit easier to see if we amend that path, so you can increase the spacing of your stroke. And now you can see how a path consists of these individual shapes. So now let's change the shape source to see what happens when we do that. So you tap on edit and then tap on import, and you can see there's a few different options of how to import your shape source. So you can use a photo, you can import from a file, but then there's also the Procreate source library. And this is a really good starting point because it gives you so many different options. So you can scroll through this and you can see that there is so many different shapes to choose from. So now for the brush that we are going to create, let's select this acrylic stamp here and then tap done. And now you can see how the preview has changed, and we can now see the individual stamps of the source that we have selected. So now let's have a look at some of the shape behaviors. The first option here lets you scatter the brush, and that randomly rotates the brush. You can also rotate the source all at the same angle if you would like to. And then count is an interesting setting because this determines how many brush stamps are going to get placed on top of each other in order to form the stroke. So now let's see what happens if we increase this. And you can see now how the shape changes its form ever so slightly. slightly because it's got all these stamps placed on top of each other. And then you can randomize this as well if you want with the jitter, or you can also completely randomize the shape source placement like this. You can flip X and flip Y. And then you also see here this azimuth setting. You can turn this on or off. And this is important if you create calligraphy brushes where the angle of your Apple pencil matters, because with the azimuth setting, you can make sure that the stroke always follows the tilt of the Apple pencil. For the brush that we're going to make today, we don't need it, so we're going to leave it off. And then here you've got some other options of rotating the source, or you can even make it a little bit more narrow or wider. So definitely try out all these different settings here. And then next up we have the grain source, and this works pretty much the same way as the shape source. You also have these different options of how to import grains. So we're going to go source library, and then we're just going to choose one of the existing grains here, and then we're going to tap done, and you can see now how the grain has been applied to our brush. So now what we're going to do is decrease the spacing again, and so now we can see the grain of the brush come through. And then again, you have different options here of how you want this grain to behave. You can zoom it in or out, and then you can make it bigger or smaller inside the shape. Another thing you can do is choose texturized, and this means the grain always stays behind the shape and doesn't really move with it, but I never use this setting. I always use the moving grain source like this. And then I usually don't touch any of the other settings, but definitely feel free to play with them if that's something that you're curious about. So now we've already looked at stroke path a little bit, but this is what I usually work on next. You've already seen how we can adjust the spacing in between the different shapes like this, but then we can also amend the jitter, and this now moves the shape sideways as well, so this can give some really interesting effects. And then here at the end we have fall off, and this determines how quickly your stroke fades out, but this is a setting I usually don't use, and I just keep it at none. So now let's move on to the taper settings. So this determines the start and the end of the brush, how they behave. One of the things you'll notice with the Apple Pencil is that it's very pressure sensitive, and in order to help with the start and the end of the brush stroke a little bit, you can use the taper settings. So you can taper the start and the end of the brush, and I usually set it to just a little bit here at the start, at the end, not too much. And I also like to set the brush tip to blunt, and then that makes sure that I've got a nice start and ending to my brushes. Now let's move to the next setting, which is rendering, and this makes a huge difference to the outcome of your brushes. And so again, this is a lot of trial and error here, so I recommend that you just try it out and then see what the result is that you're getting. So we can sort of go through all these different settings here. And for this brush, I'm going to choose uniform blending because I want to show you some of the other options as well. And it works best when you set your rendering mode to uniform blending. So now what we're going to do is turn on the wet edges, and then we're also going to turn on the burnt edges. And this now creates a super cool effect. Let me clear my drawing pad. I'm going to choose a different color so you can see what this looks like. So now the edges of the brush are ever so slightly darker, and this creates just a really, really nice effect. And then I also want to show you what happens when we change the blend mode. So now let's draw a few shapes to start with, and I want to make them overlap a little bit as well, like this. And you can see how the overlap creates some darker parts. So now if you change the blend mode of this, you'll see how when the shapes interact with each other, they create some different colors. And now what we're going to do is set this to screen, and this creates a super nice effect where the edges are really dark and then the inside is lighter, and then you can keep painting and this creates a really cool effect. All right, so next up is the wet mix settings, and this is how you can create watercolor brushes. The dilution determines how much water you're going to put on your page, and you can already see in the preview how this creates a really, really nice watercolor effect. And then charge here determines how much paint you have on your brush and how quickly it should run out of color. And then the attack setting here determines how much color gets put on the canvas if you draw a little bit fast. master like this. And with pull, you can determine how much of the color should get pulled along. But for the brush we are making today, we are actually not going to use these settings. I just wanted to show you that they're here so that you know to try them out as well. So now we're just going to decrease dilution back to 0, and then all the other settings are not going to get applied. Now, next up is color dynamics, and this is such a cool setting. I really love playing with this. And again, there's so many different options, so I very much recommend that you play with these settings yourself. But I just want to show you one setting that I like to use, which is color pressure. I don't like the stroke color jitter and the stem color jitter is too much for the brushes that I make, but I can see how they can be useful for different applications. It's just not something that I use, but I do use the color pressure quite a lot. So you can change the hue, for example, and now you can see already that the brush changes its color and it changes it with the pressure. So you can put more pressure on and it makes it lighter, and then you put a little bit less pressure on and then it makes it a bit darker, which is pretty cool. And then another option you have is to bring in a secondary color. And now in the preview, it brings in black. But when you're actually using the brush, you can choose the two colors that you want to mix together. But for our brush, we are not going to use color pressure for now. So I'm just going to put it back to the way it was. And then we have dynamics, and this is actually very interesting as well. So you can achieve some super interesting effect by changing the dynamics of your brush. So that jitter is cool because you can see how you can create some more irregular shapes like this. So let's set this to about 39%, and then you can also increase the opacity jitter a little bit, and again this creates a super cool effect. So we're going to set it to that. And then of course Apple Pencil settings. This is super important. This is what determines the pressure settings of your brush. To be able to create that thin and the thick stroke, this is the setting that you have to change. So we can set that size, and you can see how the shapes are already starting to change. But now let's clear that pad and let me show you what this means. So now I only start with light pressure, and as I draw, I'm starting to put on more pressure, and you can see now how this creates this super nice effect. And then if we decrease this, you can determine the size change depending on the pressure that you're putting on your Apple Pencil. And then there's lots more settings as well that you can play with, but for the brush that we are going to make, we're not going to make any of these changes. And then here we have the brush properties. One of the things I recommend you do is actually change the maximum size. Depending on the brush that you're creating, you might like it to be able to go a little bit larger. And then also the minimum size. You might not like this to go very small, so you can change that here as well. With the opacity settings, I usually leave them at max and none, but I'm not using opacity in my brush settings that much, and that's why I just leave it at the default. And then here, last but not least, you can also name this brush. So usually what I do, I give it a prefix so that people know that it's my brush, and the prefix for all my brushes is IPL for iPad lettering. And then I'm going to call this brush Avocado, and you'll see why in a second. And then you can set your logo here. So let's do that now. Let's select my logo and then type your name. And then we can sign it as well, like this. And now we can tap done. And so now this is the very first brush that we created. Now let's try it out. So I've got a dark green color selected here, and I'm going to try it out starting at around 20% size. And I'm going to draw an avocado, and the reason why I called this brush this name is because I really feel this is the brush that you want to use to paint an avocado. Let's see what it looks like. So I'm going to just paint it in, and you can see how this brush has this super nice texture now. And so now if we want to make this a little bit smoother, we can just paint over it, and this looks really cool. So now you can use this brush not just to paint with, but you can actually use it to smudge with as well. So what you want to do now is long tap on that smudge tool. So now you can smudge with the same brush, and so we can use this as well. And you can see how this works really nicely as a smudging brush as well. So now one of the things I don't like that much about the brush is that it's quite rough around the edges. So now it's time to refine the brush a little bit and see how we can make this a little bit smoother so that we can paint our avocado a little bit faster. So we're going to go back to the brushes. We're going to tap on avocado, and now we are going to make some changes. So the first change that we are going to make is the jitter. This creates kind of a sideways motion with your brush strokes. So we're going to turn this all the way down to the bottom. And then we are also going to go back back to shape, and we are going to decrease that scatter a little bit. And what we can do here is decrease the spacing so that the shapes become a little bit closer together. And you can see how that brush is already becoming a lot smoother now. And then the next setting that we want to change is the jitter here. And we want to decrease this ever so slightly to make it a little bit smoother as well. So now let's see how these changes have affected the brush. So we're going to go back, we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to try it out again. And you can see how this is already much smoother. So let's see if we can make a bit of a better avocado this time. So we're going to paint this in, and this creates a much better shape already. Let's try the smudging as well. And this works very nicely, so I'm actually quite happy with this. So now if you think the edges are still too frazzled for you, the next thing that you want to try out is actually change the shape source. You can see that this brush really creates those jagged edges, and that's because of the shape source. So if you don't like it so much, you can now go in, you can change it to a different shape source. So maybe let's choose this crayon here instead, and let's see what this does. And you can see already how the edges of the brush are a lot smoother now. So now let's try it out again. I'm going to create a new layer, and we're going to try and paint our avocado again. And now it's so much smoother. So this is how you can try out different settings of your brush, try out different shape sources. And then of course, if you don't like the grain, you could go in and change that as well. So now this looks pretty cool, but as you can tell, we have some pretty wobbly lines. So let me show you how we can fix that. This is something that I really like for my lettering brushes, and you might like to turn this on for your painting brushes as well, but that really depends. You can also get some weird effects when you do that. There's a Streamline setting here, and if you turn this up, then you can really smoothen out the strokes, and you can see the difference just from sliding this backwards and forwards, how much this has an effect on the smoothness of your stroke. So what I recommend you do is actually put it all the way to the max, just to see the effect that you get when you do that. So now let's try this out, and you can see how it's got a little bit of a bounce back effect, and this is probably not something that you want for your painting brushes, but for the lettering brushes, this is what we want. So now I recommend that you try this out to see which setting that you like. I just wanted to show you that this is an option, and you see now 50% is probably a really nice setting, because now it's much easier to make a bit of a nicer shape avocado if you wanted to, and to keep your strokes a little bit smoother. And now over to you. It's time for you to start playing with all the brush settings in Procreate and create your own Procreate brushes. Now, if you find this overwhelming because there's so many different settings, I've actually got a whole course about Procreate 5 where I'm going super in depth with all the settings of the brush studio. In the course, I'm showing you how to make a variety of different brushes for different applications, which includes calligraphy brushes and painting brushes and all sorts of different brush settings that you can use for your own projects. So make sure you're checking out the course if you're interested in learning in more detail how to make your own Procreate brushes. I really hope you found this video useful. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And then I'm also going to bloop up another couple of videos where I'm going to show you some more Procreate 5 features. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.